So on this first video, we are going to talk about solving rational equations. So rational is a fancy math word for fraction. So see, there's fractions. Don't freak out though. I got you. And equations just means there's an equal sign. We're going to do applications next week. So the first thing it says to do is factor the denominators. Well, in the denominator, there's no like x squared plus something. So we don't actually have to do that step. And actually, all of the problems I gave you, we don't have to do that step at all. Oh, also remember that you do not have to take notes over this stuff as long as you promise to listen to it. So you don't need to be writing this down. Just watch and absorb. Skip back if you need to. Watch it again if you need to. I will have these video notes on my website so you can, on my New Distance website, so you can open them while you're working on your Math Excel. So the first thing we actually need to do is find the common denominator. So the common denominator is all the pieces of the denominator with no repeats, which doesn't matter in this problem, but I'll show you what I mean. So all pieces of the denominator with no repeats. So let's look at what our common denominator is. So common denominator CD. Okay. So in this first fraction, the denominator is 4. So that goes in our common denominator. And in this second fraction, the denominator is 5. So that goes in our common denominator. Actually, I should probably circle these and show you where they come from. So 4 came from that denominator, and 5 came from that denominator. So that's our common denominator, 4 times 5. So then it says list the excluded values from the denominator. The excluded values from the denominator, this says we have to set the denominator not equal to 0. Well, this only applies if there's a variable in your denominator. And for this first problem, I didn't put a variable. There's no letter down there. So we only have 2 numbers. So we actually get to skip that step for this problem. The next step is my favorite because I know some of you don't like fractions. On this step, we get to get rid of all the denominators. So how we do that is we multiply each term by the common denominator and we cancel legally. So our common denominator in this case is 4 times 5. So I'm going to multiply each one of my pieces here by 4 times 5. So when I multiply each piece by the common denominator, it needs to be multiplied in the numerator or the top, not the bottom. It doesn't matter if it gets multiplied before or if I would have written it here. It doesn't matter. It's just wherever you have room. So in front of or behind each term, remember terms are separated by plus or minus signs. So x over 4 is one term, so that it got multiplied. X over 5 was one term, so it got multiplied. And the 9 was one term, so it got multiplied. So you had 1, 2, 3 terms, so we had to multiply 3 times. Now this cancel legally is the best part because this is the part where we get to just start crossing stuff off. So anything that's in the denominator, you can cross it off from the common denominator as long as it's the same. So 4 and 4, I can cross those off. On this one, my denominator is 5, so I can cross this one off. Over here, though, kind of a bummer, there's no denominator, so I can't cross anything off. So now we write what's left. I can't remember if I said this, but I'm going to pause the video often to write stuff just so it doesn't make it any longer, and you don't have to, because you're not writing it, so that way it doesn't matter if I pause it or not, because you're not writing it. Anyway, sorry. So next what we have to do, after we canceled everything legally, we FOIL or distribute what's left. So we don't actually have any parentheses anymore, but we can just combine these. So 5 times x is 5x, 4 times x is 4x, and 4 times 5 times 9 is 180. So now I have an equation here, and the next step says solve the equation. Ignore this part because I'm not going to make you do that. So to solve this equation, we would need to combine like terms. And I hope that you see that the 4x and the 5x are like terms. So 4x plus 5x is 9x. So 9x equals 120. And then we would divide both sides by 9. And we would, that says 180, not 120. I don't know what I was thinking. X equals 20. And then the only thing we have to do is down here it says, check your solution with the excluded values. Well, in this problem, there is no variable in our common denominator, so we have no excluded values, so we don't have to worry about that. So the last thing we do is just double check that our answer is not an excluded value, because an excluded value means it can't be the answer. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, 2 more examples. This first one, you might think you want to cross multiply on it, but I promise you, you don't. If you cross multiply on it here and here, x plus 1 and x plus 3, we would have to FOIL that and we would end up with x squareds. And I promise you don't want to deal with that. So let me show you an easier way. So this is going to be the easier way. The easier way is to first look at the denominator and see if I have to factor them. It's just x, not x squared, so I don't have to. So let's write my common denominator. So the first denominator says x plus 1. The second denominator, oh, it says x plus 1 again. So that's a repeat. I don't have to write it. So my common denominator is just x plus 1. So before I move on, I need to write my excluded values. So I don't know if you remember this about fractions, but you cannot divide by 0. You cannot divide by 0. So anything that's in the denominator with a letter, we have to say, okay, yeah, that can't equal 0 because we can't divide by 0. So this over here, excluded values are telling you that this is what your answer cannot be. So if I subtract 1 from both sides to solve this, x cannot equal -1. So if I get -1 as an answer over here, I have to go, nah, son, this doesn't have a solution then because it can't be that. But let's find out if that is the answer. So what we do is take our denominator and multiply both sides by it. Again, it doesn't matter if you put it in the front or behind, but both, all the pieces, anything separated, any fractions separated by an addition or subtraction sign. So then we look and see, okay, can I cancel anything? Well, do you see how this is x plus 1? I can't cancel just the x with that x. It has to be the whole thing because when there's a plus sign, that ties them together. They can only cancel completely or not at all. When there's a plus or a minus sign, you have to cancel the whole thing or nothing. Lucky for us, that's also an x plus 1, so we can cancel it. How about here? Yep, that's also an x plus 1. So look at that. The denominator canceled. All that's left over here is a 5. All that's left over here is an x plus 3. And now look that this doesn't look as yucky as it did just a second ago because those denominators are gone. So now I need to get everything, all the numbers on one side. So I'm going to subtract the 3 over. So 2 equals x. Or if you want to rewrite it, x equals 2. Now double check, is that my excluded value? Is that what my answer cannot be? No. So this is the answer you would put in Math Excel. This is just telling you what the answer could not be. Okay, so this is the answer. That is not the answer. All right, last one. Let's look at this one. On this one, do I have anything to factor in my denominator? No. So let's look at the common denominator. Well, the first thing in a denominator is a y. The second thing is an 8. And then there's a y. Do I already have a y? Yes. So do I have to write it again? No. Remember, no repeats. Okay? So just because we're used to looking at this as with the 8 first, I'm just going to switch it around, but it really doesn't matter. Okay, let's talk excluded values. Excluded values for this one, 8y cannot equal 0, so y cannot equal 0. I'll have to pick this up in another video because it looks like I've reached my limit.